Hey everybody, before I get started, I just want to mention a couple of ways that you can engage with me on a more personal level. I have a few avenues set up and I keep focusing on one, and I figured why don't I make a short little video talking about all of them real quick before we get into these episodes. So first thing, Patreon. There's a link in the episode description, in every episode description to the Patreon, as well as a video on the feed called Major Announcement that has all the details of what each tier offers and how much they cost. I implore you to check that out. I offer a lot of cool shit for my patrons. Second thing, the Discord channel. There's also a Discord link in the episode description and in every episode description. I have multiple channels set up there for each show that I'm covering, and it's a great way to just engage with me. I have a channel set up for MMA talk as well. I'm a big MMA fan, so if you're an MMA fan, you can check that out as well. There's a link to the Discord in the episode description. And then lastly, the Facebook and Twitter. Social media. Follow me on there. I post news on there. When I say news, I mean like, hey, I'm stopping covering this show. Hey, I'm starting covering this show. Let me know what you think about this. I do live watches of things on Facebook where like I'll check in and say I'm watching so-and-so show, and then I'll like live comment while I'm watching it, and that'll be cool if maybe you watch that show too and you want to watch along with me, or you're watching it later and you will see my thoughts, which are usually pretty entertaining because I'm usually pretty high when I'm writing them. So check out all those links in each episode description, and let's talk about this episode. Peace.
One mic, one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. One mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. One mic. One mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about episode 7 of the FX and Hulu series Fleishman is in Trouble, entitled Me Time. The episode title refers to Rachel's single hour of sarcastically named me time that she uses to very, very sadly cry alone at home in the hour that Hannah is asleep right before Toby comes home. So I'm just going to say right up top, I thought this was a really powerful episode of television, and it especially resonated with me because it didn't just show me like an aspect of womanhood or motherhood, but it helped me to really understand the impact of experiencing a bad pregnancy. But even aside from that, not even a bad pregnancy, a bad birth, but even aside from that, how a string of just really unfortunate and shitty incidences can take someone from a really good place to a complete and total mental breakdown. And then also, it showed me, I think, a perspective on relationships that, you know, you can always kind of have in your head where you think you kind of understand, but you see something like this, and you see now like the idea that Toby's perspective was framed, was what I said in my video for the first episode. You know, Toby's perspective is framed in a way that allows us to see it from his viewpoint. We don't see Rachel's viewpoint. I said in that video, we need to see Rachel's viewpoint. And when we see Rachel's viewpoint this week, it's not so much about Toby was right or wrong, or Rachel was right or wrong. It's about understanding how these individuals' life experiences made them into the people that they are, and then how I think their poor communication or lack of communication altogether at times just caused, I think, little things that just revolved around not seeing eye to eye that could have been easily solvable. It turns these things into marriage-ending problems. And I just found that to be incredibly interesting, incredibly sad and impactful and powerful. Just a lot. And you know, this show has been a kind of a masterclass in character development, right? I mean, you take the idea, like I said, that there are two sides to every story, and you find a way to not just show both sides, but to help us really understand both sides. Not just like, oh, I see what's happening here, but to kind of like understand that person's perspective. Like when we see like, okay, this is what Rachel's upbringing was like. This upbringing caused her to hold these values, and then those values based off of that upbringing manifest in this way, and then you mix it with somebody who has an entirely different experience, an opposite experience, and neither one of these people understand where the other person is coming from. And, you know, you look at me, I was shitting on Rachel at the beginning, and we all knew that we were meant to take that viewpoint. We were meant to see Rachel in a negative light, and I think we all knew, I definitely knew because I said it, that we're going to see Rachel's perspective, and it's probably going to change how we look at things. And even then, I still underestimated how impactful and how powerful this episode really was. But let's see, where do I want to go? I think let's just kind of talk about this episode a little bit. So, like I said, this week we see Rachel's side. It doesn't really change the fact that Rachel's behavior when we were seeing Toby's side was wrong. It was. Or that Toby was wrong to be upset with her. He wasn't. But, it helps us understand, like I said, how a person can get to this point and what that must feel like. And we see Toby, I think, very clearly being an asshole in this episode, but it's less about Toby being an asshole and more about us understanding, like I said, Rachel's upbringing and how that created the person she is today, how it created these values, and then how that manifests in her interactions with other people. In short, in Toby's story, where we hear his side, this is kind of like, I guess, like a brief kind of like summation of everything we get here. When we hear Toby's side, Rachel looks like an asshole and he looks like the victim. And I think that is rightfully the way Toby sees things. I think the key is to recognize after this episode that both sides have justifiable feelings. But at the same time, from Rachel's perspective, Toby looks like an asshole and she looks like a victim. And you know what? She's right too. They're both right. And I think that's why I think this is just a classic example of how, like I said, communication, a lack thereof, poor communication, can take these small, easily solvable issues and turn them into the things that can end marriage. And it's because they grow and they fester, and you end up with all these moments where Rachel's just crying in private, and it's not because, it's because of what she's feeling, what she's experiencing, and how her upbringing and her life up to this point has created this sort of person. But it's also just about that, I think, that lack of an outlet. And it's like you want to say you can talk about this to Toby, or Toby could say you can talk about this to me, and he does ask her to talk. But every time she tries to convey how she feels, he doesn't see it the right way. He doesn't see it the way she sees it, and she can't convey it in a way that makes him understand. And then what's so brilliant about this episode is that we can watch this and we fucking understand. And I just thought it was just so well done and so well written. Let's see, where do I want to move to? I've already harped on communication, I think, a little bit. I said things off the top of my head that I had written down here that it's just amazing. Like you really gain a great understanding of these two people after this episode. So this episode opens where the previous one left off, with Libby finding Rachel in the park. Rachel seems discombobulated. She can't find her phone. She doesn't know how many days are in July. She's wearing sweatpants with a blazer. She takes Libby back to her apartment. It's a mess. And I think she's very clearly in the midst of a mental breakdown. Libby asks what happened, and this is where we find out Rachel's side of the story. And I'm not going to break down every single thing that happened. I'm going to speak very broadly about these things that happened, because most of the episode really is just showing us examples of all the sorts of things that led to Rachel's breaking point. And we're mostly kind of left to draw our own conclusions about what these things mean, how they drove her there, and make our own interpretations of how we feel about her actions. So it's kind of just like, okay, we want to tell the story of this, how Rachel got to this point, and here's all these examples of what happened. I'm not going to go over every example, but I want to talk about some things, like I said, pretty broadly. And I think the most important thing to start with that we learn is about Rachel's upbringing. She lost her mom at a young age and was raised by her grandmother. She didn't have much, but her grandmother manages to send her to a private school where she just does not fit in. And I think this marks the beginning of her yearning for acceptance. She sees these fancy, well-off girls, and she wants to be like them. I like how Libby refers to this, their differences as speaking with a different accent. I think that's a very appropriate way of putting that. And she wants what they have, she being Rachel, but I don't think that's not necessarily money. It's the security and acceptance that comes along with having money. And I think that distinction is what she struggles to convey to Toby and what Toby struggles to understand. And what I struggled to understand until I saw this episode. So it's like, you look at Rachel as like, oh, money, money, money. That's all you're concerned with. Toby has a scene with her here that's just terrible, where he's very rude to her. And his sarcastic and condescension takes normal comments that would just be like exist in an argument and turns them into like really shitty things to say. But yeah, like that's what he looks at it as, and that's what I looked at it as. And now we learn it's less about, I want to be rich, and it's more about I want security, I want acceptance, and most importantly, and I think this is something that they touched on this prior, and it up to this point, it has always kind of come off as a thing like, what? But I think, we get it now. The security and acceptance that she desires was for herself, but now at this point, it's for her kids. She doesn't want her kids to have to deal with the inability to find friends, or that feeling of rejection from the haves of society, rejection from the other kids at school, or in her case, in Rachel's case, rejection from Sam, rejection from Toby. She doesn't want that from her kids, and she mentally aligns money with security and acceptance. And she goes, I didn't have security and acceptance because I didn't have money. Now I want to have money so that my kids can have security and acceptance. And that it's a complex kind of feeling and thought to convey. And that's why I said this episode is so brilliant, because it just gives us these examples, and we can pick that up based upon what we see and how Rachel responds to it. So we also see a lot of the moments, some of the more impactful moments that we saw from Toby's perspective in previous episodes. We see them from Rachel's perspective in this one, and I want to talk about a few of these. I'll talk about a couple of quick ones real quick. We learned that she buried her phone. It didn't seem like an entirely unreasonable thing to do, dealing with, again, this final moment of rejection, this time from Sam. And now she's got her phone blowing up over work shit. She's got Toby blowing her up. She's in the midst of a mental breakdown. It's just like, yo, get this phone away from me. I can't even fucking function. And she buries her fucking phone and forgets where she put it. We learn about the beef lo mein that Toby found in her crib along with the weed. We learned what that was about. We learned why she was dressing the way she did, like the sweatpants and the blazer. Like, we don't know why she chose sweatpants and blazer, but we understand why Rachel, who we've seen as very fashionable in the show up to this point, why she's walking around in the park holding a bagel and sweatpants and a blazer. We come to understand that as well. But the main two things I want to talk about that we see from a different perspective in this episode, the first one is the job offer that Sam made to Toby, the anti-marijuana thing with the pharmaceutical company, and Toby took offense to that because, like I said, Toby looks at everything as like an affront to who he is and his job and how much money he makes. So he took that personally, like, oh, I'm in it for the patients, and you're going to offer me this high-profile job and anti-marijuana, and I believe in natural treatments and exploring all these options. Like, he took it personally as something to be offended by. And all it was Sam trying to repay Rachel for a nice gesture of helping his nephew get an acting gig. Like, it's just a simple thing like that. But because of Toby's personal hangups, it became a huge deal. And like again, the importance of seeing both sides. We look at it from Toby's perspective, and we understand why he took offense to that. And now we see it from Rachel's perspective, and we can understand it. We don't see her being confused about why he would, but we can see, like, okay, Rachel looking at this like, I want the security, but she doesn't know how to convey this thought. But I want the security, I want the acceptance, I want that for my kids. And she tries to convey this, but Toby doesn't understand it. And it's just so good how this show takes, how it helps us understand these very complicated emotional issues without laying it out to us like this is what's happening, like or telling us, I should say, this is what's happening, but by showing us these two different perspectives and from two different people in these two different situations with these different upbringings that created two different people. It's just so interesting to see how these differences, these slight differences in character and personality can create such wildly unnecessary and avoidable disagreements. But most importantly, the thing that we see is the doctor scene. The doctor scene, you guys will remember from whichever early episode it was, where Claire was going into labor. The replacement doctor comes in. He doesn't get consent to break her water. And all of this happens while Toby is out of the room. Toby comes back in. And I can't remember what the guy said to her, like, I'm the person you're stuck with, or it was something like, he's like, you gonna act like a baby, or are you gonna have one, or something to that effect. And then Toby says the That's not how you talk to a patient. And when I did the video for that episode, I'm like, even I was like, yo, Toby, why the fuck would you say that? Like, that was not a cool thing to say. But now we see what happened when Toby was out of the room. And now you can see, you get a much better understanding of not just why Rachel was so upset in that moment, but why this had such a long-lasting impact on her life. And because even coming out of that situation, dealing with that postpartum, like, having Toby not there, not understanding, not really having anyone to talk to, feeling like people are looking at you as a bad mother, like all of those sorts of things that come along with that made Rachel so much more understandable in this moment. And then to top it all off, she sees the motherfucker in the elevator later and he doesn't even recognize her. And like that, again, like these little things, just like, okay, I see the doctor who traumatized me, but it's like that guy is like this large looming figure in your life that she could pinpoint that guy in that moment as the moment where everything went to shit for her, and this motherfucker doesn't even recognize her. Like he's like Thanos. I don't even know who you are. I hate that I made a fucking Thanos joke, but he's this large looming figure. She doesn't even know who the fuck he is, and like I mean, he doesn't even know who the fuck she is, and like that's just wild. Like how fucked up that must feel for Rachel to see somebody who had such a monumental impact from how they traumatized you, but from that guy's perspective, he doesn't even remember you because you're probably one of a million fucking women he's treated like shit, trying to get in and out and just do his job and get a paycheck. Ironically, the paycheck that you want Toby to get. Isn't that ironic? That the guy that ruined her life is the exact opposite of who Toby is, even though her and Toby have had their issues. Toby would have never been like that. Toby's a phenomenal doctor, and like, but it's just that not seeing eye to eye on these viewpoints and not understanding where each other is coming from, like, and where I mean coming from not just from a perspective, but coming from in a literal sense, like your upbringing. So after all that, and I think this is really interesting too. We learn in the very final moments that Rachel says she actually liked Libby, and she just thought Libby didn't like her this whole time. And after everything we learned in this episode, for her to say, I always liked you, I just thought you didn't like me, you just kind of got to go, God damn. Like everything else, you're just like, oh, this is terrible. I can't believe this is happening. This is why all of these terrible, differences in perspective, like all of these things are just so monumentally bad. And then you hear that, and you're just like, God damn. Even something like that, a simple misunderstanding like that. And think about now that we have all of this information on how Rachel became the person she is and what she's dealt with the whole Toby situation. To just find that out, like, oh wow, she really did like you. Think about how something that insignificant, especially if you're Libby, how your behavior toward Rachel, how much of a massive impact that had, and you had no idea. Like, such great stuff in this episode. Great stuff. So, and speaking of great stuff, I want to talk about some of the great moments, and then I'm going to close with a couple of thoughts. Great moments. Rachel crying. Every time we see her cry is great, because it's not just the performance that Claire Danes gives in it. It's how we feel coming to the realization and understanding of how easily triggered she is and how justifiably easily triggered she is. And it's like every time she starts crying, you don't go like, oh man, or oh man, here she go crying. Like you get it. You're just like, man, you feel bad, like, man, another tough break for Rachel. Crying during her me time, that's sad. Like, that's your me time. That you ironically call it that, but still, like, that's your me time to just sit there and cry alone in private. That's sad. Rachel crying at that first support meeting, fucking powerful, dude. Like, and just, getting that release after all of these years of not feeling accepted, and then you break down, you get that release, you cry, and then what do you get? Acceptance. And then that just makes you cry more. Like it's just beautiful work done here on this episode. Rachel trying not to cry when she was trying to fix things with Alessandra. She's on this woman's doorstep who she made famous, coming to the realization that she abandoned her for all of this time. I think they said 3 weeks, and she's about to cry for like the umpteenth time in this episode, and you see her kind of like start to cry and then just let me get it together, like swallow it, like I'm not gonna do it now. And just like that, the idea of like everything that she's been through, to have to be strong and have to like, I can't cry right now. Again, that's sad too. Like to just feel like I can't be vulnerable. I can't be who I am or who I want to be in this moment because, I'm a woman. I can't look like that. I have to carry myself a certain way or I'll be looked at as lesser than if I'm showing any kind of emotion when she's dealt with what she's dealt with, and she should be able to show that emotion. When Rachel brings up the idea of moving to LA to Toby, he's barely listening. He's being sarcastic. He's being condescending. And then he says, kids probably won't even notice if you're gone anyway, and hangs up. And she says that's the meanest thing that anyone has said to her. And I paused and I come to the realization that's the shitty thing that was said to her right before she dropped off the kids that Toby didn't even fucking remember that he said. And then it makes you think about the doctor scene. The doctor scene has this massive impact. The doctor scene, the one, where he broke the water or whatever, that moment had such a massive, traumatic impact on Rachel's life, and the motherfucker doesn't even know who she is. And now Toby says the worst thing to her, the meanest thing to her that she's ever heard in her life, and she brings up the next day, he don't even fucking remember it. Man, great writing here, man, on this episode. Great writing. And then the scream at the yoga center was, what can I say? You saw it. Again, more powerful work from Claire Danes. I thought the fucking veins in her forehead were about to explode. Great stuff. And I want to close with a couple of thoughts, and I will see you guys for episode 8, the finale. So I was curious to see how her pregnancy with Sally went, just because, like, given her experience with the Hannah pregnancy, what not just like did the birthing go okay, but like even just finding out you're pregnant, the 9 months of being pregnant, like given that the last time this happened, you have all these negative feelings and experiences tied to it. What would that have been like when you go through it the second time? I kind of would have liked to have seen that, and maybe we will in the finale. At one point, Libby narrates about a mother being the hardest job in the world from Claire's perspective. And I really like that scene and how it ends with Rachel saying that it is the hardest job in the world, when we know, due to Libby's narration, that she doesn't believe that. She believes that being a full-time mom and having a full-time job is the hardest job in the world, because it's 2 full-time jobs and you don't ever get to be absent from both of them. You have to be present at each one of them all the time. And I really like that, the idea of like being a stay-at-home mother is not the hardest job in the world, not having to actually go to a job, and then having to go to a job and then just paying someone else to watch your kids, and not the hardest job in the world. Having to do both of those things, hardest job in the world. And then she just goes, yeah, being a mother is the hardest job. Like, I like that scene. After the divorce, Libby narrates that Rachel said, marriage is the section of your life always meant to end, like childhood and puberty. And I thought that was a powerful statement too, because, being at my age where I'm seeing my peers, the people that I grew up with, are getting divorced. And it's made me reflect on that very concept, because I think about my friends and being 40 years old and getting divorced, and they're like, now they have to like enter this new phase of their life that's totally unfamiliar, unexpected, and that they have to contend with that. Contend with the fact that they might not be cut out for it. You enter into this dating life and you're 45 years old and you don't know shit about apps. You don't know shit about how people, changing Instagram handles or whatever the fuck people do nowadays. Like, you don't know about that, and now you have to enter this phase of your life. It's not just the post-divorce phase, but it's the like middle-age phase, and that's got to be a lot to deal with. And I don't know, that like looking at the idea of, if you're one of those people, looking back at your marriage is like, that was that time, as opposed to like, this is your life. Like, okay, I've had these experiences while I have been married. So like, these are all, shared experiences. I did this, I did that. And like, we were married and we did all these things. And like, looking at it as like a journey with 2 people who all have these shared experiences. But like, from this, from not perspective, this is a totally different thing. But in this situation, you have somebody who now has to deal with kind of like the young 20s age of their life again, but without those skills and those tools, and looking at your marriage as like a portion of your life that you lived through and you're now out the other side. Like, that's just, I don't know, that's just an interesting thing. And I think about my friends who are divorced, and what that must be like and how difficult that must be. And to have that worded like that, I thought it really resonated. And then I also, lastly, I really liked how Rachel showed up at Toby's apartment and was scared to go in, not because, well, she was scared that he was gonna what he would say to her, but more so being scared of the fact that he was right. And I thought that was pretty poignant as well. So I'm gonna wrap this one up. This was an incredible fucking episode of television. I thought incredibly well written. I mean, I'm not gonna continue to repeat myself of all the great things that I thought this episode did, but really great work. I really looking forward to the finale, and I will see you guys next week for episode 8. Peace.